This is Ann Peterson, and this is a 4-part video series on marriage. All references and information are taken from Successful Marriages and Families, Proclamation Principles and Research Perspectives by Hawkins, Dollahite, and Draper. Copyright 2016, Brigham Young University. This video is titled The Hard Times and takes information from chapters 6 and 8. Infidelity is a growing concern in marriage. A misconception in the world today is that infidelity involves solely having sex outside of marriage. However, being completely faithful to one's spouse requires more than just avoiding adultery. President Spencer W. Kimball taught, marriage presupposes total allegiance and total fidelity. We marry with the understanding that we will give ourselves completely to our spouse and that any divergence is sin. We show our faithfulness to God by loving Him with all our heart, might, mind, and strength. We show fidelity to our spouse in the same way. Our spouse is the only other being besides God whom we are commanded to love with all our heart. We are commanded to love our spouse with all our heart and cleave to none else. There are 4 general types of infidelity: fantasy, visual, romantic, and sexual. It's important to point out that infidelity doesn't take 2 people for it to occur. Many times, infidelity is committed within the mind or the heart of a married individual with no other participating party. The first type is fantasy infidelity. Fantasy infidelity is when one has an emotional affair with someone who doesn't have any knowledge that that's taking place. Someone who's anonymous, or they'll likely never encounter in person, such as a celebrity. This type of infidelity involves fantasizing romantically about someone other than your spouse. Many people justify these thoughts by claiming that their love for their spouse is dead, but President Kimball taught that when love wanes or dies, it is often infidelity of thought or act which gave the lethal potion. There must be no romantic interest, attention, dating, or flirtation of any kind with anyone outside the bounds of marriage. President Harold B. Lee taught that thought is the father of an act. No crime was ever committed by someone who didn't think about it first. The grass is greener on the side of the fence that you water. The second type of infidelity is visual infidelity, or pornography. This is perhaps the most common type of unfaithfulness, and the physical aspect of pornography is the practice of self-stimulation while viewing pornography. The Lord has warned us that we should not look upon anyone lustfully. The third type is romantic infidelity. Romantic infidelity is when an individual becomes emotionally involved with somebody else in their life other than their spouse. So it's characterized as a second life or trying to escape the monotony of everyday life. If you have, say, a best friend that every time you want to talk to someone, you go talk to them instead of your spouse. That is a romantic infidelity. Elder Bruce C. Hafen and his wife, Sister Marie K. Hafen, noted that while romance in marriage is wonderful, Lucifer, the enemy of our desire for fullness, tries to convince us that we must escape our dull routines and seek the dramatic gestures of romance outside the home, because he claims that life's petty burdens and chores impede the desire and love. They go on to suggest that Satan wants us to believe that every marriage would be like Romeo and Juliet. And they don't ever talk about Romeo and Juliet's household clutter or their unpaid bills or their crying children. They talk about the dramatic romance. Research confirms that there is a utopian edge to infidelity. It offers an escape from everyday life. It might even make people feel empowered, like they're reinventing their life. But research suggests that these people will inevitably be disappointed over time, since everyday life has a way of catching up with us. Routine becomes the enemy of spontaneity. It will eventually happen to where life will be. The fourth kind of infidelity is sexual infidelity. In contrast to romantic infidelity, this occurs when a person engages in sexual acts outside the bond of marriage. This can be with or without an emotional attachment. Visual affairs, detached fantasies, and romantic affairs can often lead to sexual infidelity. Vion Smith, a professor and marriage counselor, warned, infidelity is a subtle process. It does not begin with adultery. It begins with thoughts and attitudes. Each step to adultery is short, and each is easily taken. but once the process starts, it's difficult to stop. There are many consequences to infidelity. Apart from the spiritual aspects, infidelity has many negative consequences. It's one of the leading factors of divorce, often produces traumatic impacts on the spouse who was cheated on. They feel nauseated, repulsed, depressed, undesirable, insecure, helpless, abandoned, anxious, or even suicidal. Children tend to be confused and disillusioned and experience despair. Another consequence of infidelity is the negative impacts of pornography. This can include objectification of people. We are being bombarded with messages that it's normal to treat people as objects. Objects are not alive. Their job is to please us. Objects don't speak or challenge us or walk away. We control them. And when they don't satisfy us, we just get rid of them. When we objectify people, we falsely believe that they are only there to please and gratify us, not to challenge or disagree with us. We stop seeing their humanness. Another impact of pornography is overemphasizing the visual, over idealizing body types, often unrealistic body types, as well as overemphasizing sex. Lastly, it impacts the instant gratification and instant solutions. This runs counter to Christ-like attributes of persuasion, long-suffering, gentleness, meekness, love unfeigned, and kindness. President Kimball stated, "Spouses are sometimes inconsiderate, unkind, and difficult, and they must share the blame for broken homes, but this never justifies the other spouse's covetousness and unfaithfulness and infidelity. There are many people in troubled marriages who do not commit adultery, just as there is plenty of infidelity that occurs even when spouses are generally satisfied with their marriage. Infidelity has less to do with the state of the marriage and more to do with the individual. So how do we prevent marital infidelity? First, set boundaries. Be on guard. We think that infidelity happens when spouses don't love each other or the marriage is bad, but it's not primarily about love or sex or attraction. It's about boundaries. It's about where we draw the line. Second, be fiercely loyal. Decide to cleave to only each other. Control your thoughts and put your spouse first. Here is a list of wise walls for preventing infidelity, a way to help set up boundaries and cleave to your spouse. So supposing infidelity happens, how do we repair a marriage? There are 5 steps to repairing a marriage after infidelity. 1, rebuild trust. Become accountable. Establish those boundaries and rebuild your trust bank account. I always talk about that relationship is like a bank account and you have to put more into it than you withdraw. Otherwise, there's nothing there when you go to take more. Make sure you're rebuilding that trust bank account. Second, gain perspective. Understand why and how this happened. Don't look for excuses, but understand reasons for how this happened. 3, repentance and forgiveness. This requires confession. It requires forsaking the sin. It requires forgiveness. Believe that forgiveness can be given by God and the injured party. But then one must give up the right to punish the offending party. You're not condoning, but you're no longer punishing them. Forgiving an unfaithful spouse is necessary to repairing the marriage. 4, overcoming addiction. Get rid of it. You don't get rid of dandelions by mowing off the top. They just come back. You have to pull them out by the roots. Lastly, make the choice to stay together. Heal the past, strengthen the present, and enrich the future. Repairing your marriage should be possible, but it isn't always the path. Elder Oaks taught, when a marriage is dead and beyond hope of resuscitation, it is needful to have a means to end it. President James E. Faust addressed the issue of divorce directly. In my opinion, just cause should be nothing less serious than a prolonged and apparently irredeemable relationship, which is destructive of a person's dignity as a human being. At the same time, I have strong feelings about what is not provocation for breaking the sacred covenants of marriage. Surely it is not simply mental distress, nor personality differences, nor having grown apart, nor having fallen out of love. This is especially so where there are children. President Faust suggests a test with 3 hurdles: prolonged difficulties, apparent irredeemable relationship, and destructive to human dignity. Prolonged difficulties. Spouses should not seek a divorce without a lengthy period of time to attempt to repair or reduce serious problems. Make sure there is time for potential change to occur and that an unrushed, careful decision has been made. Elder Oaks counseled even those who think their spouse is entirely to blame should not act hastily, noting that most unhappy marriages become happy again if couples hang on and work to resolve their problems. We encourage people at the crossroads of divorce to do everything possible to correct the problem. Get rid of the computer, go to counseling, move, do whatever it takes. And at the end of the process, that way a person can look at their children and God and honestly say, I tried everything possible. The second hurdle is an apparently irredeemable relationship. By this, we believe President Faust means that there appears to be little hope for repairing the marital relationship. It requires that sincere and sustained efforts have been made to understand and fix the problems. If one spouse is unwilling or unable to make the effort, it does not excuse the other spouse from determining their part in any of the problems and making the needed change. Lastly, to the destruction of human dignity. If a relationship has deteriorated to the point that it threatens to destroy the dignity of one or both of the spouses, meaning that an individual begins to lose his or her sense of worth, that is the time. Certainly, abuse or repeated infidelity threaten a victim's sense of worth. But feeling unhappy or unfulfilled in a marriage does not meet the standard, nor do feelings of emotional or psychological distance or growing apart. Irritations or conflicts brought on by personality differences and other personal preferences rarely rise to the level of threatening our sense of worth. Looking at a secular perspective on the crossroads of divorce, researchers suggest allowing time to decide about divorce, trying to resolve the problems before deciding to divorce. Researchers estimate that only about 30% of U.S. couples who divorce make an attempt to reconcile before the divorce, which is unfortunate because 80% of couples see improvement in a relationship after visiting a marriage counselor. A national study documented that the most common reason people gave for divorce was a lack of commitment. Other reasons were too much arguing, infidelity, unrealistic expectations, a lack of equality in the relationship, and a lack of effective preparation for marriage. People can learn better communication and problem-solving skills. They can establish more realistic expectations. They can learn to treat each other with greater respect and act as equal partners. Many good resources are available for engaged couples who want to work before they're married to better prepare for the challenges ahead. Researchers estimate that half to two-thirds of divorces come from couples who were not having a lot of serious arguments or experiencing abuse. Most had unrealistically high expectations about the marriage. In general, we are counseled as family and friends to encourage a marriage to stay together and to work it out. Often people will choose divorce for their own happiness and well-being, but studies have shown divorced couples are not happier or have better well-being after divorce, even those that were remarried. Divorce is not a reliable path for improving your well-being over time. However, there are far too many instances where one's basic dignity or safety, or the children's dignity or safety, are put in jeopardy by destructive marital relationships. One challenge associated with it is that sometimes individuals struggling in a destructive marriage get so worn down that they lose the sense of self-efficacy and ability to trust their own judgment. They may be unable to make the correct decision to divorce, and in this case, friends and family may need to help the marriage to end. A situation of great marital pain occurs when one spouse rejects or questions their faith while the other remains devout. Spouses' spiritual wanderings are not just cause for divorce. Instead, we should offer compassion, love, and patience as a light to attract our spouse back to the path. Without question, it takes courage and discipline to stay in an unhappy marriage for a prolonged period of time. It takes wisdom and wise counsel to evaluate whether a troubled marriage can be redeemed, plus skill and effort and humility to repair it. It takes spiritual insight to discern if it's an unhappy marriage that's become destructive of one's basic human dignity. But the bar should be set high. Patient efforts should be made to repair the relationship. President Gordon B. Hinckley and Dallin H. Oaks provided challenging but needed counsel. Now I speak to married members, especially to any who may be considering divorce. I strongly urge you and those who advise you to face up to the reality that for most marriage problems, the remedy is not divorce, but repentance. Often the cause is not incompatibility, but selfishness. The first step is not separation, but reformation. Under the law of the Lord, a marriage, like a human life, is a precious thing. If our bodies are sick, we seek to heal them. We don't give up. While there is any prospect of life, we seek healing again and again. The same should be true for our marriage. If we seek Him, the Lord will help us and heal us. Latter-day Saint spouses should do all within their power to preserve their marriages. There isn't a general catch-all for how to deal with the hard times in marriage. I think that the most important thing is to remember that marriage between a man and a woman is ordained of God. It is eternal. It is spiritual. It is not to be taken lightly. It should be entered in with intention. It should be nurtured and loved throughout the healthy relationship. We should be clear and decisive about the things that we want. And when things are hard, as they will be, we should be open to our own influence into that marriage, our own part of those hard times, and what we can do to help to patch that relationship. Thank you for listening to this video series on marriage. This is Ann Peterson.